Hi, I'm Debbie Moran, and introducing one of my favorite members of the Houston Astronomical Society, Craig Lamison, and he's been a member for a few years. I'm not know exactly how long, but you're not one of those 30-year members, right, Craig?
Nope.
Yeah.
2013.
So 2013, and I think he told me he's been learning a lot since then. And he's going to be talking about an area that I'm not very familiar with. I'm still very old school. It's time for me to pass the torch to someone else next year, probably partly because of that. But there's all sorts of astronomy apps out there. And Craig will be introducing us to one of them called SkyTools. That apparently has a lot more capability than we're going to talk about tonight. This will be not so much about controlling a sophisticated telescope, but about using it to plan your visual observations. And Craig, by the way, has an engineering background. He did engineering for something I think is very cool, is pipelines for offshore drilling, and is now retired, I understand, Craig. And
that's correct.
So lots of time to do astronomy. And without further ado, I'll introduce Craig. We're working on the screen sharing. And we'll go ahead and give it a try.
Well, folks, as has been said, I'm Craig Lamison. Our discussion tonight will concern SkyTools software. Let me see if I can properly change screens. I can do that. As Debbie said, SkyTools comes in a variety of versions. This is a Windows software, and I'm not going to talk about all of them. There's one that's just for astrophotography. I don't have that one. There's another one for controlling your scope real time. While I have that one, I don't use that aspect of it. Finally, the version that this should correspond to is the SkyTools standard version. I think it costs $99 or thereabouts. This will not be a detailed user's manual, although I do hope to post it on our Facebook novice page. Well, it does a lot of things. I don't expect you to even remember all the things I'm going to talk about, but this should pique your interest, and it should help you remember if you're using SkyTools. Yeah, Craig said that it would do that somewhere in here. I will show you where some of the aids are that will help you find those again if you don't want to refer back to this presentation. This will primarily be about how I use it. I use it to plan what to observe and when. I use it to find targets in the sky, primarily by star hopping. I use it to confirm observations, even if I use GoTo, which I definitely sometimes do, particularly in the city. I use it to electronically log my observations. I actually take them in the field on a just old school paper and pencil, as Debbie probably does as well, but it's handy to have them in a database, and SkyTools has an ideal one. You can then compare the observations, one you made back in 2013 when you were a ranked newbie, to one when you think you've got a little more experience than you had back then. And if you're into submitting things for the Astronomical League observing programs, it will help you document your observations, and then you can ship them off to Stephen Jones, and he will review them and pass them on. We mentioned confirming the observation, so I'm going to take an aside here. Here's an observation I made using GoTo. So I wanted to find the sailboat cluster. And in doing so, I sent my Celestron NexStar to what I thought was the sailboat cluster after aligning it with a couple stars. And this is the field of view that I saw. Now, this field of view didn't seem quite right. I definitely saw an arc of stars. When I looked closer, there was a nice bowsprit, a deck house, and some very faint stars for a sail. It's capsized, yes, I know. That's partly a function of which telescope you use. But I still wasn't sure. I went and synced the telescope on a nearby star and went back, same field. Well, later on, I try to confirm it. I bring up the cluster in one of SkyTools visualization tools. And I compare the stars and they don't match. I turn, twist, look at the bright stars and the geometry, and these are fainter. The area seems smaller. And so I wander around the vicinity, and sure enough, I find a bright star, Kappa Cassiopeia, for example, and I find an arc of stars and a bright bowsprit and a deck. And so I named this the false sailboat asterism. Now, one other aside, Joe mentioned the El Dorado Star Party. Well, I was set up between Joe and Bram Weissman of our club and next to Will Young from the Beaumont Club. And I mentioned this to them because they were looking at the sailboat cluster. And it turns out that both Bram and Will consider this the Halloween cat cluster. And if you look at it in a Dobsonian or an alt-az Newtonian telescope, right side up, it looks very much like a cat with a face and an arched back and a tail extending out of the cluster. And once you see that, you will never again think of it as a sailboat cluster. Well, after that aside, let's move on to the next slide. That covers the introduction, but we've got a lot of other ground to cover. I will essentially do that by going through the basic operation of the software, navigation, and how to get help and support other than this presentation, how I use the observing list to plan my observations for a night or a week, how I can use the finder chart to find those, and then, as we mentioned, confirm the observation, how you can then record electronically the information and document it by publishing to print or PDF. The interface is somewhat different than your standard Windows software. You actually have a menu, but it's very small, and most of the functionality is accessed from the primary screen, the nightly planner. You can right-click all over this planner screen and bring up all sorts of functions. I'll show you some of those later. And you can double-click, and certain screens give you other access to other information. So we'll take that menu and screen tour. One of the fundamental things you need to do to make this software work for you is set up things that are particular to your observing style and equipment. Also, locations are critical given sky darkness and time of day and year. You can also access help on the rather abbreviated menu. Doing so gives you another table of contents. For instance, help contents gives you 3 tabs, the contents shown here, an index, and a search function if you don't find something through the other options. There are some excellent tutorials available, how-to steps for things you might want to be doing that are common operations, and about SkyTools, which tells you which version you have and information of that type. Finally, you can contact Skyhound. I have found them very receptive to database fixes of things I found that weren't quite right once or twice in the screens they show, and bugs that you may find in the software. This is, after all, software. By the way, Steve Goldberg was online, I believe, as well, and he's a beta tester for this software. So not just me that you can ask questions to. Here is the screen in question. We have here a number of things that are in an observing list. The menu is up here at the top of the screen. We saw that before. Below that is the night bar, as it is called. Now, let me see. I'm showing here, well, I don't know if you can see live transcription enabled on your screen, but it is showing on mine, and it's over the night bar. You can see on this graph hours going from noon to noon, with the period of interest, the night, in the middle. You'll also see the degrees above the horizon on the vertical scale. And there are a number of curves. Here's a yellow one, for example. That is the sun. Not surprisingly, high here around noon, descending as the day goes into twilight, setting and into night, and then rising again. The blue line, and you can remember that by blue moon, is the moon. The black dot here is a picture of the moon on the night in question, which it was almost new, but it will show you phases as well. It's also good to know that that was setting and thus not interfering with faint fuzzies. Finally, you'll see an orange for object of interest. That is the track of your preferred object. The one highlighted here on the screen is the new one, Corona Borealis double star. Again, you can see that that rises through twilight to the highest part of the sky, and then the view deteriorates through the night until midnight. Finally, there's a green line across the middle here, and that is essentially 30 degrees above the horizon. Below that, faint things are going to go away due to the atmosphere you're looking through. If we continue down, we now see the list in question on this line. This particular list is the Astronomical League binocular double star list. Here you can actually twiddle with the weather if you want to take that into account. I leave it on auto. There's ability to generate an observing plan and also to attribute a certain series of attachments to this list. You can filter the list in quite a number of ways. Classes here, well, these are all double stars or multiple stars. But in something like the Messier object list, you're going to have symbols here indicating galaxies, double stars, nebula, and clusters of various sorts. If you are concentrating on a certain constellation, as shown by this column, you can select it. Likewise, if you only want to look at things you haven't logged, this yellow column shows I've logged all these except for 62 Eridani. You can limit it to just ones you've logged or not logged. Quality is how good is the object going to appear compared to its best quality during the year. Here it is good, deteriorating, and not so good. This is just the difficulty of this object through the night. Finally, this one is special for double stars. Can you split it or not with the optics that are shown at the top of your screen, in this case of 20 by 80 binoculars? There are a number of functions that you can apply to this list. We'll go over a number of those. You can click the column heading to sort. That would be an example here, constellation. Click it once and it goes from Andromeda to Vulpecula. Click it again and it's Vulpecula to Andromeda. So you have options to sort those. You can drag and drop these columns into different orders, and you can add objects to your list, and you can also modify the columns you show. You'll see these symbols various places on this screen. Other places you'll see it are with instruments and stuff. This means you can, in this case, select the column scheme you want, and in other cases, select, say, the optics you want. Given the gear symbol, that will actually allow you to pick, change the settings for the columns you picked. A number of columns are default columns that come with SkyTools, but you could also put in your own custom column arrangements. And those can be essentially include any or all of these particular pieces of information. Moving over to further action that you can take on this screen, well, you can hover over things. If you hover your pointer over, take this cryptic X, for example. Well, it's pretty tiny and you have to move around a bit to get it to work. But when you hit the sweet spot, it will actually give you a definition of that. That is, how much air are you looking through for this object? 1.0 being straight up versus some other numbers which deteriorate as they get higher. You can also right-click. For instance, if we pick an object on this column and right-click, it'll give us a choice. The closed observatory means observed, or you could pick not yet observed, which would give you an open observatory or no value, or even re-observe. Thus, you get different choices there. There are other choices. Take this double star or multiple star system, Gamma Equus. If we go over here to the pair column, you'll notice it says AB. Well, this multiple star system has an AB pair, an AC pair, and an AD pair. So you can right-click on that, and it will allow you to pick which ones you're interested in. Now, this being binoculars, well, AB is very bright and within range of this set of binoculars, but note the 1.5 arc second separation. Well, that's something like 30 times better than I can make out with these binoculars. So that is not the pair we're looking for. AC here is wider separation, but it turns out that it is fairly dim. AD, both bright and a very wide separation. This particular symbol tells you it's one of the Struve catalogs. If no pick and you just double click on the line, you can get this object information window. This gives you a number of choices, ways you can view the sky through the binoculars or any of the scopes and binoculars you have set up. You can create log entries and other operations. We mentioned the air mass. If you look down here, for instance, at this Kappa Draconis, you see a 2.5 figure. So you can get an idea of what that means. Here's the North Pole, Polaris, 30 degrees above the horizon. And you can see Draco is now circling underneath. So it is not the best time to be looking for something if it is faint. And you want to wait till next season when it's up above. Going back to the menu, let's look at how you set up things in SkyTools, which is important to get the views that help you the most. Clicking on Setup gives you a number of options again. We will look at telescopes. If you click on telescopes, you will get this information screen. It shows a number of telescopes that I have set up, but it also allows you to put in a new telescope, or once you've pulled up a telescope, edit any of the information associated with that. In this case, this telescope has an associated kind of red dot unit finder It's a Rigel quick finder. It also has a magnifying finder, standard plain vanilla correct image right angle finder with a aperture of 30 millimeters and a magnification of 8x. It has an erecting prism, which means it looks like binoculars when you look through it. And this is the field of view. Other information on this is given here, standard telescope details, star diagonal and erecting prism. I could choose either one since I have both. You also need to put at least one eyepiece in for every telescope, in which case you click this particular button, gives you an extensive list of commercial eyepieces. Yours may not be on there, so you can also put in a new one. Or you may not know exactly what kind of eyepiece yours is. It says 40 millimeters on it. Well, what does that mean? You can pick one that's similar, or if you know things like the field of view, you can put that information in as well. Well, setup also allows you to set up binoculars, observers, and preferences, but locations is the next most important one to set up. Here are a number of places I've observed from. In this case, as I mentioned, I was going up to the El Dorado star party. You do not see El Dorado here. You can pick a new one from a list that it gives you. You drill down North America, US, down to Texas here, over to say Houston here. But look at these picks. Well, they're big, light polluted cities. A place that you're likely to really want to observe, unless it's the Texas Star Party, probably won't be in here. So you're going to have to set that up yourself. You can select from these built-ins or use manual entry. And this will give you this screen where you can put in your name, latitude, longitude, elevation, and click OK. And it now appears with that data as a choice. Likewise, the menu has a tools menu, things like open last chart, kind of a go back to the view you had before. Designation search, however, is the one that I use the most often. You can also back up, which I do, and restore. Now, you'll get this screen, which allows you to type in a name or some designation, and it will then search and try to find the closest approximation. In this case, it gives us just one because I spelled it right and everything. But in many cases, you'll get quite a number of picks. Choosing that, you can find more object information on it, which will give you this screen. Other things you could type in that would get you to the same place are listed here. It is a multiple star. This is the B component of that star. Here is the primary, the A component magnitude, and it's a blue star, the A component. Clicking on this will give you the other stars in the system. You also have other actions you can take. Click on that. You can view log entries for this star or view it naked eye. Where is it in the sky or with your telescopes? So if you take that box and look at the information box, you'll find also a number of tabs are available on that screen. You can double click or right click, pick one of these tabs, and actually you can then see, for instance, in this case, how difficult is it with the naked eye? Well, you can see it, not split it, but see it. With the binoculars or with a telescope are all listed here. I've just shown a small section of what you can see there. The observing lists that you have put in your system will also show up here if that object is on those lists. chart numbers as well. For instance, I often supplement my SkyTools visualization with an atlas. The Pocket Sky Atlas is probably my favorite. And this will tell you which page number in that atlas the object can be found. Well, what about these lists? Where do you find them? Number of choices. You can find them from the SkyTools site. For instance, the Astronomical League lists mostly are located there. The Texas 45 has a list. You can get the STX file, say, from Renee Gadali. I've got it as well. And that will bring that list up in SkyTools. You can also use the built-in tools, that nightly observing list generator, which will give you a bunch of selections. Do you want to look at showpieces for the night, solar system objects, deep sky objects of interest, unusual objects of various types, or stars in particular, or double stars? You can add objects to your list and create one by one, or take a list and modify it. And if you're one of those database gurus, you can make a comma delimited list using Excel or Word, and you can read a list in from a text file. Got list? What next? Well, you need to select your optics. This, for instance, is binoculars. That will influence what is shown down here in these columns, such as splitability and difficulty. For instance, under difficulty, you can ignore it. You can take only the visible objects. This is ignored, but you'll notice down here it's not visible and it's undetectable. There's really no sense in showing that in your planning list. Or you can have a nice, easy night with obvious and easy targets or apparent targets, or you want to get more challenging and really get into the faint fuzzies, go down here and pick these. Your times matter. For example, you're out at Columbus, you're going to leave at the midnight light window. Well, you can change this 24 hours to quit at midnight, so that you won't get a list of things you can only observe at 3 a.m. What about the target times? These are shown in these columns. For instance, when do SkyTools think it is best to observe this object? Generally, when it's highest in the sky. When might you first begin to observe it? Based on when it's rising and when the sun is setting, or the moon. This column applies. And finally, well, give up all hope if you're after this time. The object is not going to be very good. As we mentioned, you can sort those columns as well. Now, what if you need to now find an item on the list? Well, you can actually select one of those views. It will default to whatever you have chosen for your main screen. So if it had binoculars on there, this will first come up with binoculars. It will default to that optics. If you want to change it, you have the choice up here to change things, dates, times, objects, whatever you want, once you have the screen up and running. In this case, it was a double star. It's in Boötes at the best time of the night, which is what it defaults to. You can see this is somewhere northwest in the sky. So that if you were out at the Columbus dark site, standing in the field, you'd look north towards the observatories and then off to your left somewhat to see this constellation. This is the finder view. So we're zoomed in now to the constellation. These stars are ones that SkyTools would expect to see in the finder associated with that 80mm telescope. So this is a 50mm finder in this case. You'll note here there are more stars up here than down here. And that is because This is near the horizon, shown the black line here, and thus atmospheric extinction is causing the stars to disappear down in the thick atmosphere. This is high enough. There should be some stars available, not ideal. It would have been better on a different day. Here you have red circles, which indicate the view through your unit finder. So if you're pointing the telescope at the sky manually, you would pick something between Arcturus and the next star in the constellation. Remember, Big Dipper, arc to Arcturus. This rectangle essentially shows you what this field of view is giving in the next view down, and this rectangle shows you what this field of view encompasses. The circle here is essentially the field of view of your finder. So you should be able to see what's here. This is somewhat cut down so that I chopped it off to fit. And so it doesn't show this star, which should appear in the upper right corner. There's the one in question on your list. You can access this by information, right-clicking, and a number of other ways. Here, for instance, this would give you a choice through any of the scopes you've set up. This is the one that this one was defaulting to here, which I've since changed for the view. So naked eye, finder view, and eyepiece view. And in this case, it's a correct image diagonal, a terrestrial diagonal. So if you were looking at a tree, it would be upright and correct left to right. If you put in a star diagonal, it'll flip these things around appropriately. Now, you can modify this and do things with this screen. And of greatest importance, while you can change all these things here, the observer, if you have more than one observer in your software, it will keep them separate. The telescope, well, it's saying this is not a very good view in an 80 millimeter. I think I'll try something larger like my 8-inch SCT. You can change it to that. Where are you viewing? My backyard, light polluted. Columbus, much better. El Dorado Star Party, top notch. This is the time. You're seldom likely to pick the optimum time, so I generally change it to the time that I'm actually expecting to observe. The date, that's different than what it originally was set at. And then you can print either to paper or a PDF. And this is what I generally take into the field. Although you can put SkyTools on your laptop, it has a red screen function, and you can use it that way. Now we mentioned confirmation. We have one example where I actually found something interesting, but it wasn't what I was looking for. And this is another example where I totally missed it. So I'm looking for the double star 24Com. And I have this field of view shown in SkyTools. And this is my sketch that I made as it was supposedly setting into the trees. Poor time to look. My fault for doing that, and I was in a hurry. Naturally, that's what this led to. Well, let's compare these two. First, let's check one. Which direction is west? This is the direction it's going to appear your view is moving in the eyepiece, i.e. west. I drew an angle of drift, matches pretty good. This direction as well. Now, what next? Well, here I actually showed the direction of the double star, which is not east-west, as SkyTools shows it, but north-south. Not looking good, folks. Well, furthermore, let's see what other stars I showed in the field of view. Down here, I sketched 4 of them in a trapezoid, fairly bright. In the SkyTools view, no stars whatsoever in that area. Well, I see some stars here, but no stars on my sketch. Another star over here. And again, no stars on my sketch in this vicinity. What about this star up above? Nope, not there. This does not get counted, folks. Well, I don't fail all the time. So what about this one? Another double star we were using as an example. My sketch. This was with a fairly large telescope. So I show the stars here. They're much closer together here, but that's partly because it's very difficult at night to sketch two stars real close together. Well, I don't show the direction of drift in SkyTools here. It's off the screen, but that seems to be oriented correct. Two stars here, two stars here. Lower left of those, a star. An arc of stars above the target, one off to the left, one down below, another arc of 4 stars down here. Check, 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 check. Got this one. Well, okay, we've got it. We want to log it. I start with my field notes. This was one I recently did for a sketching program I'm working. I was actually comparing the globulars M14 and M5, which are in the same part of the sky around Ophiuchus. And I first needed to bring up my notes on the observing list, the sketching program M5. I click that row, I highlight it, and then I can now have that target available and choose create log entries. You actually have a number of options here. You can click to highlight the target row and type L, a lowercase l, to create a quick log entry, or type M to create multiple log entries one after another. And you get the same 2 choices versus the pick list right here. Quick log entry L, create log entries M. It gives you the shortcut. Well, so for a single entry, this quick log entry is fairly useful. You can type your information in here. This button gives you a choice of eyepieces that you've put in your system. You have this choice of telescopes. It defaults to whatever one is set up as the default telescope. You can change the seeing and all the information. But it's kind of scattered across the screen. And I find it more useful to use the Create Log Entries button, which helps automate it. These will also default. In this case, since we highlighted M5, it's going to default to M5. It's going to default to the date we were observing, which was on the planner screen. The local time, well, this wasn't the time I was observing, but I can change that. The location, correct. Observer, correct. And you can pick the instrument to come up here or make it ask you or select. You also have a choice, once you've done that, of presets, for example. And these can be defaults. These are just typed in. Or you can select from whatever you've previously put in as presets. As we mentioned, it will default to the main screen, which is here, September 27th. It will default to the location you set on the screen. It will also take the best time in the list and populate this screen. You can right-click to select any of the example presets, for example, and it will default to the ones you put in as defaults by saving defaults, but you can also edit those. Carrying on, what about adding an illustration? I mentioned sketching, for example, or photography, or you want to select something from the web that you can refer to compare to what you were looking at. SkyTools has a way to store those under attachments, which can be either notes or images. This can be selected from the object information screen. Again, it had these tabs. You find the one that says image and select that, and then add image, and you're ready to go. With that add image dialog, you can select where you want it in the notes folder or the attachments folder. You can browse to where that image is on the web or your hard drive or any other access point. You can put in a description if you want. You also can let it default to the path if you don't. So you can edit that description, the default description, click OK, and bingo, it adds it to the database and shows it to you based on where it finds, where it's pointed to when you click View. You have that choice to actually view the illustration by clicking here, Pleiades, View, and then it gives you this view, and it gives you some activities. You can zoom the screen. It usually comes in very large, depending on the resolution of your scan or picture. Just contrast, brightness, and zoom in or out. This is the Pleiades. I actually cut out a picture from Telescope magazine in order to compare whether I had correctly detected the reflection nebulosity around the bright stars, and I think I did. You can also view external, which essentially defaults to whatever viewer you have on your Windows machine. And that will allow you then to move on and print the particular item that your image you're looking at, either to a PDF or to a printer. Now, what about the list functions and printing a whole set of observations for submission, say, to the AL program? Well, that's found here under list functions, which will again give you an information screen, which allows you to pick a printer. And you can then move, once you select the printer, to instrument restrictions. I didn't know this until I started this presentation, which will allow you, for example, on a binocular program, to select only things you've seen with binoculars. Makes sense. I've seen many of these objects with the C14. The binocular program, people do not really care about those observations. You may find them interesting, but this allows you to extract just the binocular ones from your list. The observer that you want, the fields you want, shown here, all of them. I don't use the brief form. I like the format of the long form better, and print it. And you can send that PDF then to Stephen Jones, and he will pass it on after vetting it to the Astronomical League. Well, that pretty much brings us to the end of this quick and dirty presentation. What resources does the club have if you have other questions? And we may have time for a few questions after this. I'll turn it back over to Joe then. But the club has an email list server that can be accessed by a request to info@astronomyhouston.org. And you send a question to that list server, and I guarantee one of our 800 members or whatever it is now will send you an answer, and probably many answers. If you're too bashful to crowdsource, well, send it to me, and I'll see if I can help at this email address. Likewise, I hope to post this on our novice site. This would be found under units on Facebook and the novice group. This symbol should get you there. I'm not sure that works real well. I'm not a Facebook expert. I may manage to get it there, but more help check with somebody younger than me. And that's it. I'll turn it back over to Joe if you want to take the screen.
I appreciate that, Craig. Thank you very much. And as much as I think I know SkyTools, I learned a little something out of this presentation as well. So that's absolutely fantastic. We did have one comment in the meeting chat. Steve Merriman said this would be great to have at the Messier Marathon. And I couldn't agree more. I actually used it at the Messier Marathon myself because there's the opportunity to sort the observing objects based on the best time to view them. And this will allow you to kind of move those things in the orders that you need to capture all of those things that are setting in the west and move your way across the night sky towards the east when some of these other objects may not yet be available to view or are coming up. So Craig, I know you and I both use this tool at the El Dorado Star Party because they provide observing challenges, observing lists. As you mentioned, we download those lists and kind of work through it the same way, right? Try to prioritize those objects that are best suited for that time that we're observing, and then log those and move on to the next ones, right?
And I need to get on to logging. I've kind of neglected that. And as the questioner mentioned, it is advantageous for things like the Messier Marathon. I used it for that, as Joe attributed. And there is even, I believe, one of the how-to or tutorials on the help screen that is specific to the marathon. Right. And then you can adjust it. I wanted to create one just for binocular observers, which was what I did, and then printed that in a PDF and distributed it to those interested.
Absolutely. Okay. I will open it up here to see if anybody else has any questions they may want to ask. If you do, please come off of mute and ask your questions.
Now, I have a question, Craig. Do these programs now have do they have any kind of self-correcting reddening of the screen so you no longer have to use red filters? My twilight on my Android gets really dim and really red, like to the point where I don't think you would need a red screen or red film over the screen anymore. What's out there now, either with monitors or the individual programs?
I have used mine on red screen mode in the observatory. Their recommendation is it is best if you put an additional red screen over your laptop screen, which is what I do. But you could certainly experiment. If your screen's already dim, that may not be required. But again, he may have chosen colors that work that way, because if you exit the program back to a normal screen, you could flash everybody with white light on your email list or something like that. So I would say experiment there and see how it looks.
Good point. Other questions? Going once, going twice. All right. Well, Craig, thank you so much for the presentation. Like I said, this was, certainly something I learned from, and I try to use SkyTools often. So I was like, oh, I could have printed off my logs that way for my binocular Messiers. But it's really important. The software is just software; it's a tool, right? I think ultimately it really helps with the planning, the observation, confirmation of the objects that we're looking at, just like you laid it out there. And the logging of those objects. And you'd be amazed when you get in the practice of doing that, how many objects you see you've realized without understanding that. When we were at El Dorado, I had finished an observing list, and I said, reluctantly, I think I'm going to start on my Herschel 400s. Well, I didn't realize, because I had my logs in SkyTools, that I already had 70 something Herschel 400s. So it's like, oh, okay, well, this may be not as daunting as I thought it might be, right? So it's a really good practice for a lot of people who are just getting started in amateur astronomy, and maybe some of those folks who have been at this for a while, but don't kind of incorporate that into their normal observing routine. So, but yeah, thank you very much, Craig. I really appreciate the presentation, and this was absolutely fantastic. So this will be available to anybody else who wants to view the recording afterwards and couldn't make it today. So thank you. All right, well, let me go ahead and share my screen here. Let me know when that comes up. Hopefully you can see that. We do have
Yeah.
our, perfect, thank you. We do have our annual meeting tomorrow night. So, normally our monthly meetings are known as general meetings, but the November meeting is a special one. It's our annual meeting, and it's when we conduct our club elections to see who's going to be serving in the official officer, director, or chairperson roles for 2023. So please take an opportunity to join us there. There shouldn't be any games going on tomorrow night, as far as I know. So it's a great time to spend with the Houston Astronomical Society online. If you haven't registered, we've got the registration links on our website, astronomyhouston.org. And I always finish these off by saying, if you would like to give us a follow or a like or anything like that on any of the social media platforms that you see there, please do so. And lastly, as Craig had mentioned, if you have any questions about tonight's presentation, about tomorrow's presentation, or about anything at all with the club, send us an email, info@astronomyhouston.org. So Craig, thank you very much again. Wonderful presentation, and we'll see you all tomorrow night. Have a great night, everyone. And go Stros.
Stros.
Yeah, there we go. Take care.